Ooh, it's broken up.
Pues suelto, lucero viene alumbrando, como es. Yayita, pues suelto, lucero viene alumbrando, madrugar. Lucero prima, lucero madrugar. Lucero prima, lucero madrugar. Lucero prima, lucero madrugar. Lucero prima, lucero madrugar. Un saludo para todos los lucero madrugar. Lucero prima, lucero madrugar. Un saludo para todos los lucero madrugar. Lucero prima, lucero madrugar.
Okay, everybody, welcome. Welcome to the last Friday of July. Oh my God, I can't believe this summer is just flying by. I don't know where it's going, but it's gone. So I welcome everybody to the show. Welcome to Owen. Welcome to Jean-Jerome. And Jean-Jerome, I will let you start. I like these starts with you in it.
Thank you, Teresa. Abodu Aboye, Assalamu alaikum to anybody tuning in and to our usual friends and supporters of the show. This is Ancestral Eyes, episode 15. It's amazing. Wow. And July 31st, end of July, and we've already done, this is our 15th show. And we're very pleased, very honored to have Eoghan Craig Ballard, who is Tata Nkisi.
Yes.
And with my lovely co-host, Teresa. And yay. And just a little bit of a bio for Eoghan. Eoghan is a folklorist and ethnographer specializing in Afro-Caribbean traditions of Central African origin, fraternalism, Celtic studies, and ethnomusicology.
That's Celtic studies.
Celtic studies, yes. And ethnomusicology. And ethnomusicology, having received his PhD in folklore and folk life from the University of Pennsylvania. Eoghan has been variously musical instrument maker, bookseller, college professor, academic dean, and independent researcher. Eoghan is Tata Nganga, a voodoo saint, and is a master mason, orator for Lodge Intrepid, and GM of GLMNR NAC, affiliated with UMURM. I'll let you explain those acronyms.
What it all stands for.
Welcome.
So, Eoghan, can you give us a little bit about that music? We played that music. What was that piece by Jean-Jerome, and what was it? What was it called?
So the song is a typical song for Lucero. Lucero is an Nkisi, a spirit that is very similar, Pungo, very similar to Eshu Elegbara, or Eshu.
Okay.
But we'll go into more detail about that and a little bit about the Congo cosmology as well.
All right. So, Eoghan, take us briefly into explaining that piece of music and what that means.
I was going to mention, it was kind of interesting that you chose that particular piece. It is, as with many follow songs, very specific. And so it does mention Lucero Mundo, Lucero Madrugar, Lucero Primo, but it's also about Buey Suelto. And Buey Suelto, which translates as the wild, the loose ox, is a very particular prenda or nganga. And Buey Suelto is a particular prenda for Lucero. And it so happens that it currently resides in a museum of Afro-Cuban religion in, I believe it's actually in Regla. It's either, it's like on the border between Regla and Guanabacoa, but I believe it's actually in Regla. So I have seen Buey Suelto, and it's a very interesting exhibition because it's very old-fashioned kind of museum presentations, and they have this giant nganga with giant longhorn cow horn on it and firmas painted on the front that is probably large enough for you to sit in the middle.
Whoa.
And this is, very dramatic, and it's been on album covers and it's in a lot of other things. And of course, it was created for the museum display. It's not a real nganga.
Okay.
But as part of the panorama there's a little pot off to the side that's kind of a rusty makeshift cauldron made out of, recycled parts and very crummy looking. And that happens to be probably the most famous single prenda in all of Cuba, Muy Suelto.
Oh, well, there you go. Well, thank you, Owen, for that. I love it. Do you have a picture of that, Jean-Jerome, before we start our questions?
None of the prenda Muy Suelto, no. No,
Okay.
it doesn't.
No, I will find it later on. I'll find it later on and send it to you.
So without further ado, let's dive into the questions because that's what I like to do and that's my job. All right. So Owen, welcome, Owen. Eoghan Craig Ballard. And I like the fact that I got your name straight. So
Oh yes. That's most impressive. I have gotten everything from Eugene to Ozzy. Do not ask me how they came up with Ozzy.
Okay. Yeah, we won't go there. All right.
I have no idea.
My first question is, what would you say is your spiritual path? How would you define it in regards to, okay, I'll let you go with it, but just let me finish it off. It's going to be kind of one of those long questions. In regards to briefly describing how being a folklorist, an ethnographer, and academic dean with a PhD brought you on your spiritual path. Tell us that journey. Do I have to repeat myself?
No, not at all. I'm not sure that being all of those things brought me onto my spiritual path. I would say probably my spiritual path brought me to all of those things.
Okay, perfect. Go take it away. Tell us how that happened.
Oh, that will take the next 3 hours.
When did that happen?
But most of my life, basically, my path is I was born and I'm trying to keep running till I die. And whatever happens in between happens. However, that's not the answer you're looking for, I'm sure.
No, Owen. I need filler.
Yeah. Well, first, we will point out that I do have handy coronavirus.
Perfect.
So I'm ready for it all.
Well, I have my drink in hand. It's my Coke, straight Coke. Cheers, na zdrowie.
Yeah. So anyway, to be serious about that, my spiritual journeys began fairly early in life. I began to get...
Whoops, we've lost Owen. Whoop. Began. And then, poof, he was gone. I'm sure he'll come back. I'm sure he will come back.
He'll reconnect.
He will reconnect shortly. I'm really glad we got Owen. Owen is a character. Absolutely. I've been watching him. I think he's a hoot and a holler. And if he's tuning in, he's probably hearing me say that. And if he isn't, oh well. He can look back at the show and hear me say it. Here he comes.
I do not know what happened there. Suddenly the page swept to the side and you were all gone.
I know. We were saying that. Like,
Owen, I'm going to say this in Spanish. Owen, con permiso de tu ángel de guardia, echa un poquito de la cerveza esa a los muertos, porque sea un poquito en el dedo gordo. Porque eso pasó Tú me vas a ponerlo un poquito fuerte.
Bueno, yo lo hice antes.
Ya, no, pero échale un poquito
Pero
porque
lo
quiere esa
voy a...
cerveza. He wants a
Ya
little bit of
hice
your
un
beer.
poco más.
Echa un poquito más.
No, no.
Échale todo.
Ellos son insoportables.
Sí, yo sé, pero sabe que esa es la cosa. So to translate,
No.
Teresa, I told him to put a little libation of the beer
Mhm.
he's drinking now to the ancestors, to the spirits.
Yeah, and I said I already did that.
Yep.
They're impossible. Greedy guts.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
So, but we
All
always
right.
make sure they got plenty.
That's right. That's right.
Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Just in case you're doubting that, look at the corner here.
Oh yeah.
Oh no, we don't doubt you.
You're shocked.
So,
All right, Owen. So once again,
anyway.
take it away. When
All
did
right,
this path start and everything else?
Oh, I suppose it started with, in a loose way, in third grade when we had an assignment. This just is sort of an example.
Right.
We'd been given an assignment to memorize a poem to recite in class.
Okay.
And
what was it?
we were just told to pick one and recite it. So I did. And my third grade teacher had to ask my parents who put me up to it, because I started, "Oh, little fly, thy summer's play, my thoughtless hand hath brushed away." And she was not prepared for me to start reciting something like that.
I don't know the poem, so
Blake?
What's that?
It's a poem by Blake.
Oh, okay. All right. Okay. But I'm sure it had some sort of connotation to your spiritual path.
Oh, well, yeah, it sure does. I mean, everything that Blake wrote was metaphysical. But she was kind of shocked that I, in third grade, was memorizing Blake. And my parents assured her it was my choice.
Wow.
So, comparing the existential realities between insignificant insects, the human being, and the Almighty. And
all relevant.
So within another couple of years, I was reading a lot about Celtic mythology and myth and legends, and ended up in the process becoming a fluent Gaelic speaker. But, I also went through the stage where I decided for about 2 weeks I wanted to become Amish. I got over that in a hurry when someone explained to me what the lifestyle really was.
Oh my God. You really? Okay.
I got exposed then to things like Rosicrucianism by the time I was in 6th grade, and all sorts of other folk religious practice. I remember going to old school root and hoodoo shops by the time I was 10, and getting kicked out of them on a regular basis because they didn't want kids in there. So I would come back with my much older brother, who was a young adult at that point, and they had to put up with me. But then they were shocked by the things that I would ask about and buy. So I was precocious,
to say the least, right?
And so by the time I was in my late teens, I was doing things for Orisha and things for Vodou, mostly at that point focused on New Orleans Vodou, because that's what I had more access to in English. And
Mm-hmm.
but then I became familiar with Haitian material as well, and
Mm-hmm.
fairly quickly fascinated by Brazilian Umbanda, and didn't quite realize why certain things drew my attention. I came to realize
Mm-hmm.
much later that part of the reason
Mm-hmm.
I was drawn more to Vodou and to Umbanda
Mm-hmm.
was its distinct Congo influences, which is
And
why the
what was it
Congo
about the Congo?
the Congo
Um,
influences within them, which are at least much less visible in
mm-hmm.
Cuban Ocha, and so was much less fascinating for me.
Mm-hmm.
But the things in Umbanda have a strong imprint of the Congo, as does, of course, Vodou, Haitian
Mm-hmm.
Vodou,
Mm-hmm.
and I gravitated to that. And then much later became aware of Palo.
Mm-hmm.
And that was kind of an interesting passage as well. And I'll note this because I think it's
Mm-hmm.
relevant.
Please.
As finally, many years later, as a grad student, I was, already well familiar with attending some Vodou ceremonies in the city I was living at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And came across, because of the influence of a fellow graduate student who was half Puerto Rican, half Cuban, and she kept saying, "You've got to read Cabrera, you've got to read Cabrera." And so I ended up reading some Cabrera, and by chance found a book she didn't know about, which was called La Regla Quimbisa de Santo Cristo de Buen Viaje. And up to then, I was mostly looking at the idea of doing field work on Brazilian religion. I don't know why I wasn't thinking of doing it on Vodou, to be honest with you, since that's where I was. But I guess
Mm-hmm.
the idea was that there was a lot more literature and a
Mm-hmm.
variety of literature surrounding Umbanda, and it was
Mm-hmm.
unknown and exotic, and it was, possibly a chance to go to Brazil, which was, not something
Right.
I thought I
Right.
should pass up.
Right. And that was part of your studies, was it? Was this when
Well,
you
it
were getting
was, but
into your
it was
studies
part
as
of
a
my
grad student?
studies because I was already involved in religious practice.
Right. Okay.
Right.
I mean, my master's thesis was on linguistic politics and Gaelic language music. And I said, okay, that's not, I love that, but that's not really why I came to do a degree. I came to do a degree because I made a deal with spirits that they would help me get it if I did something in return for them.
Right.
And so we went and looked at that. And then when I found this book, this little, like 101-page book by Cabrera on La Regla Quimbisa, I said, oh my God, this is home.
Wow.
And I proceeded to somehow, magically, locate a Quimbicero in New York City. And started talking with him, and he says, well, yeah, you should be initiated after we did readings and so forth. But, we're not going to do it here. You've got to go to Cuba.
So did he accompany you to Cuba?
He accompanied me to Cuba. And within a few months, I managed to lose him because all sorts of things. But we won't talk about that here.
Okay.
One of those stories that there are many people who serve purposes and who don't fit in the long term. However, fair play to him. He did right by me in this regard, and I will be forever grateful for that. He introduced me to my godfather.
Okay. And this was
Um,
the godfather in Cuba, right?
this is my godfather in Quimbisa in Cuba. I was scratched about 25 years ago, and Roque. Well, Roque, what can I say about him? He told me when I first met him, "You just missed my birthday." I go, "Oh, I'm sorry, I missed it." He says, "Yeah, it was a couple of days ago." I said, "How old are you?" And he says, "Oh, I'm 68." And when I talked to him again a year later, he says, "You called, but you missed my birthday by a day." And I said, "How old are you again?" And he says, "Oh, I'm 65." And he, for all intents and purposes, this was 25 years ago, and I believe he was probably 68, and he looks exactly the same today.
Wow. Wow.
Gotcha.
Dorian Gray.
He doesn't have a portrait, I can assure it. Well, he does have a picture of himself up in the Munonso, but it's kind of a cartoon caricature, so I don't think it quite qualifies as a Dorian Gray portrait. But he's fortunate in that regard. So,
well, long life to him.
Your friend Norman Bayard says, "Thank you for having Tata Owen on tonight. He's a good man and a wealth of wisdom."
Yes.
Thank you, Norman.
Yes, Norman. We're going to find that out.
So, but an interesting aside about all of this. So I went to Cuba with the intent of rayándome en Quimbisa, which I did. Okay. The first day I was in Cuba, the family of this gentleman who brought me there threw a big party for his return because he was a Merialito and hadn't been there for 20 years. So in a relative's apartment in downtown Havana, there was a big party thrown. And for the previous 2 weeks, two of his brothers had been traveling around Havana inviting everybody they met who stayed still long enough to talk to them. And as it turned out, one of those people they invited to the party ended up becoming later on my brother-in-law. And he brought his sister with him, who we are about to celebrate our 22nd wedding anniversary in another month.
Oh, nice. Congratulations and happy anniversary.
So I will mention that because I didn't find this out right away, but as it turns out, her father's family is largely of Haitian origin. In fact, her father, God rest him, spoke Creole before he spoke Spanish, and from Oriente in Cuba. And then I found out that my godfather in Quimbisa also was initiated into some Haitian religious practices that exist in Cuba, and eventually underwent those initiations. So, although I was going to Cuba, the law never let me get away.
I'll bet they didn't. So now I know when we were talking privately, you had some interesting stories in Cuba, which I thought were interesting and they were colorful. Did you want to share one of those stories?
Remind me what I was talking about.
The taxi driver.
Oh, yeah, of course.
I rather enjoyed that story.
Of course. So my godfather lives in a neighborhood called Reparto Fraternidad, which is a smaller neighborhood within the segment of the city of Havana, way to the south, known as Parga.
Okay.
And so I'm coming out of the airport, and of course you get accosted immediately by, taxistas.
Yeah.
I can take you somewhere, I'll give you a good deal. So this one guy took hold of me, grabbed my bags, put them all into the trunk of his car, and I sit down in the car.
You're his hostage.
Right. I'm his captive here, and it's all just fine because I need a taxi drive, and I don't frankly care who's going to be the taxi driver. And then he asks me, where are we going? And I said, Reparto Fraternidad. And he goes, what? And I said, it's in Parga. And he jumps out of the car, unloads the luggage from the trunk, and leaves me by the curb, pointing to the next cab driver and saying, he'll take you. So apparently, Reparto Fraternidad has something of a reputation. I've never seen any problems there, but that may well be because of my godfather.
Right.
So on another occasion, I got a taxi driver who took me there, and we're going, and I said, it's up at the next corner, turn a left. And he stops. And he says, I'm not going any further. And I go, why not? And he says, hay un brujo muy malo que vive por esa calle y yo no me acerca. And there's a very bad brujo who lives down that street, and I'm not going near it. And I go, oh, you mean my godfather? That's where we're going. And he also gets all of my bags out of the trunk and then speeds off without being paid. I've never known a hustling Cuban not to take his money, especially after he'd earned it.
I love it. I love that story.
So I get out, and I'm then thinking to myself, oh, I got to lug all of this stuff down to the corner. But this was all taking place in front of the house of one of my godbrothers. And he was in the house, and he comes out, and he says, he's laughing hysterically over the whole thing. And he says, here, let me help you. So we walk down the street.
Oh, cute. Very cute. I love that. Oh, cute. Okay, so I'm going to go to my next question. I wrote them all out. Sorry, Eoghan, I didn't send them to you prior. It's all based on our conversation. Which
As I like to point out, although I may be involved in Afro-Caribbean religion, I'm Irish, and that means, if I don't know the answer, I'm happy to make one up for you.
Perfect.
Storyteller. All right. So now, in regards to your practice, your personal practice, the methodology of your practice, how do you marry both your academic side and your spiritual side? Like, what is your daily practice that you find, connects you to your spirits and to your spiritual path? Is there something that you do every day that is...
I am an initiated priest in a couple of traditions, so I do that.
Okay. All right. So then I'm going
to... I have my prendas. I have my things of voodoo. I talk daily with spirits. I talk nightly with spirits.
Right. And that's because you're an espiritista as well.
Well, that's sort of a given. And here's the thing, most people in the U.S. don't talk much about that because I will make a few enemies, but most of Afro-Cuban religion in North America is, how should we put it, benighted.
Is what? Sorry, say that again.
Benighted.
Benighted. And what do you mean by that? Benighted.
Well, to slip back into my Irishness, they don't know their arse from a hole in the ground. And that's not fair. There are really quite a few. There are quite a few very dedicated, skilled, and knowledgeable people. But there are also a lot of people who've had incomplete education and habits within the community as at large are sometimes not the best. So, most people, be they in Santo or in Palo, will go en route to initiation. And the way it usually works is they give you a bunch of misas in a hurry. They say, okay, this is it. Try and remember it. Set up a boveda this way. Change the candles and the water every Sunday. Say a couple of prayers. Now we're on to Palo. We're going to scratch you. You will bleed a lot, and then we won't tell you anything more. Now you get to Ocha, and this is where you stay. And I know I've already annoyed all of my friends who are santeros and babalaos, but that's pretty much the way it works. And so I end up getting a lot of people coming to me who say, well, I got scratched, but they don't teach me anything, and they never have, and everything is Ocha this and Ocha that and Ocha the other. And, I have a boveda, but I don't know what to do with it. And this is the reality. This is the reality, because you have to go to that sine qua ultra of Ocha, and the Santos will bring you everywhere. Well, the Santos will give you lots and lots of rituals you have to pay for. And they take up a lot of time. And sure, it's beautiful. And I love the music. And I have the greatest respect for the Orisha themselves. But a lot of people get shortchanged in that rush. And that's not the way it was meant to be. And it's certainly not the way I have seen it practiced, especially by older people in Cuba.
Yep. And a comment there by Sue. Totally had agreed with you. It's God's honest truth.
Sue, Keith, Carmen Soto will say, I agree. You're telling the truth again, from Keith Swift. So,
And, that's not to say that there aren't good things there, but people get into habits, and communities get into habits as well. So, okay, I'm done knocking Ocha. I'm done knocking Ifa. Okay? I've made my point on all of that, and I hope I did it without being too offensive, because there are a lot of wonderful things there.
No, there's no offense taken.
We have to, if we look at the history of the religion in Cuba, I mean, at the time when my
almost nobody is saying what I say, so I have to say it when I get the chance.
If were my mom alive, she would be. My mom was charged by UNESCO to do a study on the Afro-descendant religions in Cuba. Her name was Lidia González Huguet, and she published a book for the Academy of Sciences called La Regla Templo Casa de Ocha. And she met my dad because she published with him the first two full dictionaries of vocabulario palero de Cuba for the Academy of Sciences, which are all those works are at the Smithsonian Institute, and I have them here in my home. And in the time of my mom had the privilege of meeting paleros that were in their 90s, almost sometimes 100. He fell off again.
Oops.
And
wait till he gets back, Jean-Jerome.
Yeah, I'll wait. I'll give him a chance. He probably hit the button.
Yeah. We'll wait till he comes back again.
Yeah. We'll give him a chance.
In the meantime, shall I entertain you with my chair dancing?
There we go. We're going to get some music going.
Or shall I show you my dog sleeping? Here he is. Here's Owen.
Okay, I am going to ask people who are listening to this not to message me
Right.
while we're on this, because what seems to be happening is people message me and my phone knocks me off the connection.
Absolutely.
So please stop messaging me. You can do it all you want later on.
Correct.
Yeah.
Give us,
We
yes,
need
give us a chance
undivided
to talk.
bandwidth and attention. No, but that was
Right.
as I was saying, in the time of my mom had the opportunity to go with, to record, to go see some of the oldest paleros in every part, one part, point of the island to the other.
Mhm.
And as you say, it wasn't like that. Palo was palo, Congo was Congo, regla de ocha era regla de ocha, and Ifa was Ifa. That's why they the three lands. And depending on the spiritual path that the person was defined, you were oriented to the land which belonged to you, the land which was meant to see you flourish and grow. You had, at every age, you had people that are charlatans or people that would take you here and there, but there was a basic respect, and there was a basic process in terms of taking you. If somebody was said for health reasons they needed to be scratched and sworn to the Nganga, they would do that. If they said that the person's ultimate path was to go to la Tierra de Ocha, they would do that, but not like a factory.
Well, and I like to point out that the only reason there is any mixing in Afro-Cuban tradition was because there was mixing in Afro-Cuban families. And parents wanted their children to do the traditional rites of passage in their own culture. And in fact, that was often even a inflammatory subject within a family.
Right.
That's right.
Right.
That's right. Yeah.
You know? So that's well documented too. But there was no other reason to do Palo and Ocha initially, other than that you inherited the bloodline from both those nations. And the only reason that any order of, do this first, do that second, do that last, was originally established was simply a practical procedure to keep things orderly, because all sorts of stuff was going on all over the place, and everybody saw it to their advantage to establish a standardized path. There was never any intention to suggest that there was any superiority to one thing or another. Yet today you will hear people say, well, you've done the Palo because you had to do that, but now you can advance. And that's, pardon my French, bullshit.
Absolutely.
That's bullshit.
Absolutely.
Yep.
Absolutely.
Yep.
Absolutely.
No, for sure.
What Owen says is 100% correct. I mean, the regla, palo, and is its own belief structure.
Right.
System.
Each of these are completely separate cultural traditions. 100%. How can you tell me that an entire culture is incomplete?
Correct.
And another one is more advanced.
But the truth, in Cuba, the origin of that was also that for the regla de ocha, for the santero, for the descendants of Yoruba, and for the descendants of Ifa, when it came to certain secrets or certain aspects that had to do with the ancestors, working with the ancestors, like working with Egungun, working with Egbe, working with some of the mysteries that are inherent or belong to the patrimony of those respective belief systems, there was a void. Only certain things came over. And because of the nature of the slave trade, a lot of these groups were put in cabildos. In other words, they were basically to. You had Congo with person from Benin, from person from Nigeria, from person from Mozambique, from person from Angola, And they, in the sense of survival from the slave masters and the abuse and all that, they learned from each other. They began to,
Right.
to
Exchange
understand
ideas.
exchange ideas.
Oh,
But the adoption of palo, of the ceremony of scratching on, is because the same thing as in Cuba, the going to una misa espiritual, to going to a misa, a Cartesian misa, was because that aspect within the slaves that came over, that were Yoruba, they had lost that. They didn't. Those people didn't come with that as such.
oh, do let me comment.
Good comment. Go for it.
Okay. It should be noted that there are houses of Egungun in the area of Bahia in Brazil.
That's right. In Bahia, yes.
In one of the islands off of the coast from Bahia. That did not survive in Cuba.
Correct.
And it should also be noted that palo, although we deal with the dead, is not ancestral veneration.
Correct.
We deal with specific dead who are congregated in what we would call Nkisi or Minkisi or Zinkisi, which actually means medicine.
Okay. Yes.
So all medicine, of course, has a spirit attached to it.
Right.
Now, that is not ancestral veneration either, because you had Nganga Marinda in the Congo, who were mediums who would communicate with the recently dead and establish the procedures that had to be followed by the living family members of those dead in order to arrange an appropriate passage. None of that made it across for the simple reason that ancestral veneration in the Congo was first and foremost established by community and established by locale, and it required the resting places of the ancestors to be accessible. You couldn't do that 3,000 miles away.
Right.
And so that did not survive. Plus, the context of slavery didn't allow for family to be maintained. So probably most people were going to be thrown together. They may have been thrown together with other members of their same cultural group, but very often not their own immediate family.
Correct.
This could not survive the passage. So when Espiritismo appeared, and actually it appeared first with North American spiritualism, and then Kardecist Espiritismo, but another mistake that everybody makes, nobody involved in Afro-Cuban religions deals with Kardecicism. They don't. The Kardecists in Cuba will turn up their nose at what Santeros and Paleros do with Espiritismo, and they will call the Espiritista that does that kind of work Bajo Espiritismo, low Espiritism. And they will even go so far as to say it's not Spiritism at all, it's an African religion. And they deal with low, unevolved, dark spirits. And if it sounds like there's a bit of racism there, there probably is. At least not maybe intentional, not directed at individuals, but institutional. And that's because, not because they are racists themselves, some of them will be Afro-Cuban, but because the language of Kardecicism refers to low spirits and evolution of spirits, and the cultural framework of that posited African and Native American and other ethnic group spirits as lower, less evolved spirits. that was kind of racist. But remember, this all evolved in the 19th century during slavery.
Exactly.
So after the Cuban Revolution, and I mean the first one, not the final one, which sort of actually attempted to incorporate what the original intent was, but that will upset a lot of people too. A few new forms of Spiritismo began to appear, and new centers were founded, mostly in Oriente, actually founded by leaders of the Cuban Revolution against Spain, what people in North America are taught to refer to as the Spanish-American War. And the first of these were what we call, in the academic terms, Espiritismo de Cordón.
Cordonero.
Okay.
Yeah. Now, for the most part, these terms are academic terms. If you go to Cuba, most people are going to just say, "Oh, sí, soy espiritista." And they don't distinguish. They don't distinguish, but they know what they do, and they'll go, "Oh no, that's not what I do." If they're, and some of them will know cordonero, but these were terms that were originally applied by academics. So most Espiritistas don't use it. Most Espiritistas will also all say, "Oh yeah, I know who Kardec is. Yeah, he founded Spiritismo." Some of them will say they're Kardecists, but they've never read a book by Kardec. God love them, because reading a book by Kardec is, well, let me just put it this way. I would rather go have root canal work any day.
Okay. I'm laughing because I'm reading Allan Kardec's.
Well, then you understand what I'm talking about.
Well, as I say to Jean-Jerome, I'm picking out, I'm reading right straight from the start. And I said to him recently, actually, I said, why is it that I know all this stuff anyway, right? And then I've decided, like today I said, you know what? I'm not going to go linear. I'm going to pick and choose topics. So I flip through the book and I'm reading through the book that way. Because let's face it, from what I'm seeing, some of the stuff that I'm reading, I'm like, okay, like seriously, I have to have a discussion with somebody about this because I'm not sure I'm really, jiving with what he's saying. But anyway, we won't go there. We won't go there.
Well, sure we can.
I'm going to have a discussion with later.
We can do that in brief. I mean, one of the things with Kardec is he was a Victorian writer. So think Charles Dickens. Remember, Charles Dickens was paid by the word. He's not going to say in one sentence what he can say in 3 chapters.
Sorry. Yes. True.
So
true enough. And he likes to repeat himself.
I have a friend who's very involved in North American spiritualism, both institutionally and as a practitioner. I won't mention names here only because, I didn't ask him beforehand. But if you go follow my page, you'll see he posts frequently and I repost his stuff. So you can probably figure it out. But I have asked him repeatedly to consider seriously doing the gems and nuggets of Kardec, because he will post an occasional Kardecist quote that is brilliant. And I go, how did you find it in the midst of all of that rubbish? So,
See, I enjoy reading the book. Don't get me wrong. I'm enjoying it. I'm learning a lot.
Which
I really
one are
am.
you reading?
But hold on. I have to get the book. Jean-Jerome got it for me. Which one is it? The Spiritist.
You're a bad influence, Jean-Jerome. You're a bad influence.
Did you hear that, Jean-Jerome? You're a bad influence.
My job.
He knows I don't mean it.
I know. And I'm not taking it that way. Okay. So now, can I go on with my other question? Are we done with what we were talking about, or are you? Did you want to just?
Oh, I could go on for the next 2 hours on the same thing. So ask me whatever else. No, but the point is that what happened was, very briefly, and then I'll give you back the reins. First, Cordonismo appeared in Oriente, and in the West, alongside the reglas, because there's a geographical division. In the West you had regla, in the East you did not. You had palo, which was not regla de Congo, but unregla palo, and that's a discussion for itself. And you had Vodou, and you had Espiritismo. Ocha was a thing of Havana and Matanzas. And now it's spread throughout the island, but it's still mostly Havana and Matanzas. And you have Palo pretty much everywhere. And in Oriente, you have Vodou, which is Haitian, not Cuban. And we can comment on the differences between Haitian Vodou and Cuba, and Haitian Vodou that you're familiar with too at some point. But
I like what Sue had to say. Sorry, Owen, I'm just going to read. I could talk until
go right ahead. Interrupt me because I'm impossible.
No, you're not. I think you're quite humorous. I'm quite enjoying this. Oh, okay. Thanks, Sue, for that comment. That was cute. Yes. No, you know, like I said, these shows, I just sit back and I love when I can just sit back and listen to a guest talk and whatever. It's just like, it's like butter in my mouth. It comes and it melts and I learn, you know, so I love this stuff. I really do.
So in the West, you had what we call cruzado, which simply means mixed. And there's an interesting point I'll make on that, and that is the term cruzado has, as with many words in many languages, more than one meaning. So if you mention that, oh, you're practicing espiritismo cruzado, an espiritista may respond, well, yeah, okay, that kind of describes what I'm doing. I'm mixing it with ocho, or I'm mixing it with practice in palo. Or they're going to get offended and go, no, there's absolutely nothing wrong with the way I practice espiritismo. It's correct. It's not fucked up. Because cruzado can mean mixed. It can also mean screwed up. As in crossed, messed up, whatever. So whichever meaning comes into someone's head initially, how they take what you say, they're either going to accede to that or object.
And they're all right.
And they're all right. And most of them will just say, soy espiritista.
Right. In the end, that's what you want.
And if you walk down the road and you pass a dozen houses where espiritistas practice, no two of them are going to be doing the same thing anyway.
That's true. Yep.
Because there is no Bible for it. Kardec doesn't apply.
It comes down to your own spirits, your own ancestral spirit. It's really what it comes down to, your own ancestral army.
And all of that developed because there was no way to connect with family spirits in Palo or in Ocha. And that wasn't the purpose in Abaquai either. And although Vodou does deal with family spirits, they too borrowed from Espiritismo.
That's right.
Okay. All right.
So I'm done with that. Go on. Next.
Okay. All right. Next. Okay. So obviously you have a community. And so my question is, with regards to serving a wider community, as a Tata Nganga, would you say that you do it that way, or as a Voodooist, or as an Espiritista? Or do you combine all of them? I know you have godchildren, so could you tell me a little bit about that in regards to servicing the community?
Yes. The answer is yes.
Next question. No. Okay.
Next question. No. Actually, my Vodou community and my Palo community, to a certain extent, overlap. They're small.
Right.
I've thrown out more godchildren than I currently have.
You're fussy then, are you?
I'm fussy,
Okay.
and over time, I've learned from my mistakes. And I hope you can't hear all of the singing, but everybody, it's my wife's birthday tomorrow, so she and the sister-in-law and all are out there singing really tacky, modern, popular Cuban songs out of tune.
That's okay. I love it. I was going to say, I hear voices. Then you are possessed. No, I'm kidding. Okay. So yeah, no, that's cute. No, definitely. So, sing away. She can sing away.
Oh yeah, yeah. I'm not going to get in the middle of that one. Not for $1 million. Yeah, I do both of those things, and I tend to also, both in relation to them, but also in relation to a wider community, do a lot of readings in Espiritismo. But I've also been known for a long time, primarily in relation to my involvement with Palo. So, yeah, all of the above.
Okay. All right. Okay. I like that answer. Succinct, to the point. And so then what I want to do is I want to ask you, because we mentioned you as a master mason. How does that play or figure into your practice or your belief system? Like, I found that interesting. When we asked you for your bio and we were talking about this. How does that play into it? If you can just sort of elaborate on that.
Sure. Well, of course, it plays into every major Afro-diasporic religious tradition.
Okay. And how so?
Pretty much everybody's a Mason.
I'm not.
Well, you can be.
Do I want to be?
That's another question. I'll leave that one alone.
Okay.
But I will note that there are, although mainstream North American Masonry is male, what most women Masons in the U.S. would call malecraft Masonry.
Malecraft, yep.
Meaning that it's all derived from the Grand Lodge of England, which has this barrier. Continental Masonry 300 years ago began admitting women and still does. And so even in the U.S., although we are small in number, there are both women-only Masonic lodges and mixed gender Masonic lodges. But in relation to Afro-diasporic religions, Masonry is very present. The second to the current Todavía. The second to the current, in other words, the previous Grand Master of, or actually, the Grand Master of the Grand Lodge of Cuba, who is also part of and the head currently, I believe, of the Scottish Rite in Cuba, was not only a palero and a santero and a babalao, but also the leader of the Grand Lodge of Cuba. And he was one of the members who founded the Letter of the Year in Cuba.
Okay, that means nothing to me, but okay.
I know Jean-Jerome
Yep.
Jerome knows what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
And of course, you also have the Caballeros de la Luz in Cuba, which is sort of modeled on Masonry, but a nationalistic fraternal organization. Actually, it is both male and female membership now, which was founded with in Philadelphia, by the way, with the intent of developing independence for Cuba from Spain in the 1800s. And they have what is called El Libro Blanco, and that includes a great deal of Afro-Cuban religious knowledge.
Okay, all right.
Within it. Haiti, of course, is ground zero for all of that, because Haiti not only has an entire lineage in Masonry that connects with the Loire, but it was historically one of the most important locations in the Americas for the development of modern Freemasonry. And it was through Haiti that those traditions, which developed into the modern Scottish Rite, which was created in Charleston, South Carolina, came directly from Haiti. And also, Martin de Pasquale, who was the founder of the Elu Cohen, a very esoteric tradition grounded within Freemasonry, and which is the origin of the modern version known as Martinism, went to live in the last few years of his life. So all of this exists in Haiti, and it's a very live concern. And and there are, in fact, lois that are defined as Masonic law.
Wow.
And
see, I did not know that.
So when I had been initially involved in Vodou, I got involved in some Masonic traditions, and I kind of moved away from that when I did Palo and left a lot of that to the side. But when I connected with someone who wanted to do some work in founding a new organization in Masonry based on French Masonic rites in the US, suddenly they started all knocking on my door again. And that preceded my going and spending the next 4 or 5 years attending services regularly in a Vodou Montfort in Pennsylvania before I ended up moving down here. So even though my main initiations in Vodou are Cuban Haitian Vodou, I was also became involved in something that was more directly from Haiti.
Ah, okay. So I guess you've answered my question there. So
I don't know if I had, but
no, I think you did. I think you did. I get a better picture of it. So my last question before I sort of hand over the reins to Jean-Jerome, who likes to knit things together. He's the knitter. I'm the one who starts things. So my last question to you, as an espiritista of Espiritismo Cruzado, do you strictly speak with your spiritual allies, or do you use divination as well?
Yes.
Is that a loaded question, or?
I love to answer either or questions with the answer yes.
I've noticed.
So yes.
Okay. And now for the elaboration.
Okay. So, yeah, sure. I use divination. Every espiritista does.
Right.
And They use a variety of divination methods, often predicated upon what other tradition they're involved in. So while the sort of official standard most people expect is that an espiritista will use Spanish cards or regular playing cards, if they are a santero, they're probably going to use de la Lune. And if they are a palero, they're probably going to use chamalongo. They're not going to use them the way they do in Ocha or in Palo. At least not in my experience. Someone can come along and contradict me, and I'll go, oh, that's interesting. Tell me more. Because there are two types of people in any Afro-diasporic religion, including Espiritismo. Those who cling to what they were taught, and this is the right way and everything else is wrong, because that's what their imagination allows for, and because of a legitimate concern with doing things right. But this is their orientation and their perspective. And then there are those, and I count myself among them, who go, well, you know, I know that there are a lot of different ways to do this, and so I will note, oh, I don't do this that way, and I may look askance at it in certain contexts, but, you know, it's the way someone else does it, and so that's okay, because, you know, last time I checked, nobody had died and appointed me God in their absence. So, yeah. But what I will say is that in my experience, the vast majority of the Spiritistas are going to use whatever system they use as sort of a starting point. It's the engine that gets things started. And then once the flow starts going, they kind of, to use that horrible New Age term, channeling, they channel what comes to them.
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, thank you. I think you've answered that question. God, Owen, and you told me you were going to go on and on and on and on when we were talking privately. But you're good. You're really good. You said you were going to behave. Thank you.
I'm trying.
So I'm going to now.
I'm trying. It is usually a hopeless cause, but I try.
And I thank you very much. Now, Jean-Jerome, you take it away, but I will interject now and then. So go ahead, Jean-Jerome.
So just following, just keeping on that vein. So in your personal practice, do you, in terms of divination, are you more to use chamalongo, or do you use or go into possession, or do you consult by what you hear or what you see from the spirits?
Yes,
all the above.
Mostly it'll be a combination of mechanical divination with receiving messages in a conscious state. I do undergo possession, but not that frequently, and usually in the context of religious celebrations.
Right.
Okay.
There are two kinds of mediumship I use in relation to the Spiritismo, and which I will use in relation to readings I do for people who are not godchildren. And that will be primarily a mix of using chamalongo, sometimes cards, but mostly chamalongo, and occasionally siete caracole, especially if we're being pushed in the direction of, you know, talking about things related to voodoo. And I try to separate all of those things and say, okay, we're closing this down, we're moving over to this, because I am a totally what's the word I'm using? Looking for a totally rigid supporter of keeping every campo separado. You don't mix
the land.
So first of all, if some spirit comes up to me and says, okay, this person has a path in something related to Orisha, I'm going to say to them plain and simple, okay, you need to go talk to a Santero or a Babalao, because that's outside my frame of reference. I was media asiento, I don't do that. My prendas long ago ate my guerreros and my collares, and I couldn't find them if I tried. So, they're in there somewhere.
So now I think for the benefit,
but go ahead. Just let me make one other mention, and that is one of the things that I also do is a lot of mediumship related to dream. So it is not uncommon if someone has a reading with me that I'll go, oh, okay, now I understand why I saw this yesterday, because it relates to you, and I share that. Or I come back to them several days later and say, by the way, my spirits told me this, 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 and this, because they show up in dream.
Absolutely. I totally get that, Owen. Totally.
So, okay, go ahead. Sorry.
Okay, no worries, no worries. For those of people listening, we have a very mixed audience. We have people that are in Wiccan tradition. We have people that are in Ocha. I know we have some people now that are watching that are in Palo. We have some people that are in Vodou, both Haitian Vodou, yourself with the Cuban aspect, Cuban Vodou, and also Vodou from Benin, especially in Vodou Fa. We touched on, again, the differences and in terms of spirit classifications and functions. We talked about it. We made allusions to spiritualities that belong to one land or culture or sort of linguistic and ethnic root versus others. But the question for those people that are listening, how would you describe, in terms of both your practice but also your academic aspect, how would you describe the difference in terms of, let's look at by category of spirits, for instance, in the Haitian Vodou Loa, in the Impalo Nkisi, and if you look at for instance, in Ocha, the idea of Orisha or Osha, how would you classify, like, what really, for people that are listening, right? They say, what are the different? Are there similarities? Are they simply the archetype of certain, natural powers, primordial powers that were, depending on the land that you were called, like Loa versus Nkisi, or Loa versus Mpungo, or Loa versus Vodou, or Loa versus Ocha? What is, after your trajectory, you've been in you visited a few of the lands. Right. What is how would you explain to somebody the relationship and the differences between those spiritual families, let's call it that, and their respective areas of dominion or characteristic?
Okay. Well, I will try to nuance this a little. I may not quite succeed. First of all, I think there are fundamental differences.
Okay.
I think there are also overarching similarities.
Mm-hmm.
I will note this right now. I should have probably said it at the very beginning. If you are uncomfortable with contradiction, go back to the church.
Okay, no worries. I like it.
So there will be a bit of contradiction there.
Okay.
They are very distinct. They are very different because the spirits of any given place and any given geography and culture are going to be different.
Mm-hmm.
They're not going to be the same. I would love to personally have the chance to work over Joseph Campbell with a pair of brass knuckles.
Okay. Why?
Because he's done a grave disservice. There is not one story. There is not one universal thing to which you can fit everything. He tries to blend it all together, and Wiccans and New Age people, and to some extent people in other traditions, love this, and it's wrong. They are not one and the same, just as you and I are not one and the same. And yes, we have certain similarities. And yes, there may be a larger story that bears some similarities, but you end up with a lot of rubbish if you throw it all together and try to stir the soup. So while the metaphor of the Cuban ajiaco, the stew which mixes everything, is very tempting, if you've ever made stew, you know that you can really screw it up if you don't know the recipe well.
Absolutely.
And I would say the same. The Loa are not the Orisha, are not the Nkisi. Although I will also note that Loa is not a term you will find in West Africa among the Vodou of various countries. It is a Congo word. And that is to remind you that although the Asogwe tradition, the Asong tradition of Vodou, which is what everybody in the US and Canada is aware of, emphasizes a great deal of Fon, West African spirits. The vast majority of Haitian practice is Congo. All of Petro is essentially Congo.
Congo, correct.
And then there are even parts of northern Haiti where they refer to what in the south they call Petro as Lemba. And Lemba was a specific initiation school in the Congo.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So that's part of why I'm connected with Vodou, is because of the Congo part. Now, don't get me wrong. When Dambala shows up, I'm going to be real nice to him.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I like the guy.
So let's talk about it, because again, people are listening, and you know what I'm referring to. You know why I'm asking you this question, or why I'm framing this question, because this narrative is 80-90% of the time told by an Orisha practitioner or even a Babalawo, right? So
they're different.
And my purpose, our purpose for this show, is to give a voice and to make sure that, as you said, if you want everything uniform or dogmatic, go back to the Catholic Church.
Well,
so
and
understanding the differences is to really bring out from you what you're, not just what you've been taught, but also your experience. Because as you see, as you dream, as you do ceremonies, right, there are phenomena and there are experiences and story of situations, right? As a Tata, you'll have people from every possible ethnic background come to you with a particular problem or situation, right? So in seeing that, in seeing the interplay, I mean, like for people watching, like there is countless literature, articles, blogs, and everything else over decades trying to establish equivalencies.
Okay.
Such and such as Loa is such and such an Orisha, but in
it's
this
not.
land. So
take a match to it.
Go deeper though, if you can.
Go take a match to all of that.
Yeah.
And I will go deeper, and I will actually take advantage of my also being an academic to make a reference that is helpful.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things about reading, first of all, nobody should get in. There are two things anyone wanting to go into any Afro-diasporic religion of any kind, or to go to Africa to study and take up a tradition there, should do first. And that is read everything that's in print, especially academic work.
Right.
Read it all, and then read the garbage that is also published.
100%.
Read it all, good, bad, and indifferent, because it's by reading and absorbing everything through every pore of your skin that is out there that you begin to develop what we would call critical judgment.
Mm-hmm.
And so many people go in and they throw themselves at the first person who says, oh, yeah, I can initiate you. Sure, no problem. It'll cost you this. Yeah. And then, of course, they come to me later and say, you know, I got screwed over by this Tata, and I need you to fix it. But by the way, I don't have any money left because I gave it all to him. And I go, nice to have talked with you. Absolutely. Because at a certain point, I realized I'm not here to fix everybody's mistakes.
Absolutely.
But having said that, throw out the comparison thing. They only works to an extent. These different spirits may have certain areas of interest in common. So, for example, Siete Rayos is about fire. He's about thunder and lightning, and he's a bit of a warrior, and he's a hothead and will give you grief. And so is Shango, all of those things. But that's where the similarity ends. You do not treat... If you are a Santero, you are not going to treat Shango like you would treat Siete Rayos. And if you treat Siete Rayos like you would treat Shango, you're going to be in for trouble. Now, there is an academic who's written about this in Cuba who I think really hit it on the head. And the reason I say that is because I actually saw what he was describing in practice. And I went, okay, now this really makes sense. His name is Eugenio Matibag. He's a Cuban. And I believe he's in Wisconsin. I think he's still teaching. And he wrote a book on Afro-Cuban religions in narrative experience. And so he was talking about descriptions of it, but he was also talking about it in literature. And what he posited was that essentially we're not talking about syncretism here. These things aren't mixed.
Right.
They are not blended. They are not the same or an overlap. What we are talking about here, he described as being a system of multiple references. And he said, Cuba is an island that only pretends to have a single culture. It has several. It's got a bunch of different African cultures, plus a European one. And so Cubans find themselves constantly confused by this. And so the religious specialists developed a means of using multiple references. And he carries this out at some length. So to cut the long story short, I was sitting watching my godfather early on when I was still learning the very beginnings of things. And I had read this book already. And I'll make one other observation about that in a moment. But he had this woman in doing a consulta. And, he does some reading. He says, okay. So he says, Siete Rayos wants something from you. And he looked at her and the eyes didn't register. And he says, okay, Chango wants this of you. And the eyes still didn't register. And he says, go to the church and light a candle for Santa Barbara and do this. And the lights lit up.
Yeah.
So he had found the set of descriptors that she understood.
Right.
And they all serve similar purposes, even though they are different.
Right. Right.
So this is a way that Cubans developed for talking across cultural barriers within their own culture. And I think that is a brilliant description.
No.
But let me ask you a question. Because I have great respect for you and your trajectory, I'm asking you this question. I'm going to press the question a little bit further, because I'm asking. So I understand the analogy and metaphor you've given, but so again, using the example of the person who's going to for a consulta, and again, we're using the closest association, cultural association to a divinity whose characteristics most closely represent or match the general character, as you say, thunder, dresses in red, et cetera, et cetera. But what I'm asking you personally, at a spiritual level, in terms of the spiritual consciousness that you're accessing, in the spiritual consciousness which you're working with, do you believe, from your experience, and I'll explain why I'm saying this, do you believe, or do you have a sense that, whether it be Siete Rayo, also called Ensasi, whether it be Shango, whether it be Hevioso, or let me leave it in Africa. I won't go to Santa Barbara yet. But do you feel, from what you've learned from like working, do you feel, and also by the same as you described, people coming in from different backgrounds, that the ability for something like that, to actually, like an embo, an offering, a sacrifice, lighting a candle, whatever it is, whether it be prayer, do you feel that those different lands, those different spirits, but that carry a similar characteristics, represent two questions? One, a single overall consciousness, but just a manifestation in a different land? Or do you feel that they are completely different, and yet because of their association with the key elements that they govern, or the key character, they either, because the spirit world doesn't have the barriers we have in the material world, that somehow there is some, I won't say collaboration, but at least some communication between those elements?
Okay, well, I'm going to answer it a little differently. First of all, no, I do not believe they are the same. There is no overarching uniform entity.
Okay.
Siete Rayos or Ensasi is Ensasi. Chango is Chango. They are completely different beings. Okay. They are, within their unique cultural contexts, responsible for similar kinds of conditions, situations, energies. But let me put it to you this way. A chiropractor is not a
doctor,
neurosurgeon. They both deal with human health.
Yes.
They have very different understandings of what that entails.
Agreed.
I'm not going to press that and say that there's any kind of
but you use a good
I'm using a flawed parallel there.
Yeah.
So, some people might say, well, yeah, but a chiropractor is no neurosurgeon. And sure, I would not want a chiropractor cutting open my brain and poking around. So, in that context, there may be viable qualitative differences. I'm not suggesting there are in the spiritual context. They're just different.
Right. But using that same analogy.
Because they deal with similar areas of human experience, it is possible to read a general condition, and if you know the different systems, suggest to someone how they might approach it in the one that fits their understanding. And if it feels more complex than you want to do, then you refer them to someone who does that. So if as a palero or as a santero, assuming that I were one, which I'm not, I see something that's purely palo, or I see something that's purely ocha, I can say, well, you need to have this sort of thing done, but you need to go speak to someone who works with that spirit.
Right.
And so I can note that there are going to be similarities of experience, similarities of issues across all of these different systems, because they're all complete systems within themselves.
Agreed.
Which means they will have within them elements that relate to all of these aspects of human experience. That doesn't mean that those aspects are going to be identical.
Correct. But if we use your same analogy or example, you use an analogy of saying, let's say Nkisi is a chiropractor and Shango is the brain surgeon. But let's say Nkisi.
Well, I would rather say that Nkisi is a brain surgeon and Shango is a chiropractor.
But let's say they're all brain. Let's say Nkisi, Shango, and the Heavyosa all have the same specialty, because that's what we're saying. We're talking about spiritual archetypes that carry many of the same attributes, even behavioral in some way, like in terms of the general.
Sometimes,
but similar. At least they govern many of the similar elements. Let's say fire, electricity, iron. If we look at Ogun, for instance, Vodungu, or Gun in the Yoruba sense. So if we look at that, but I guess what I'm just trying to, because again, Jay Sword was asking kind of the same question after I posed it, is again, they're actually, what is the difference between the two, right? And she was asking, is it cultural or is it tradition? But ultimately, that question is asking the same thing I'm at, which is, do they represent the same consciousness, or are they just different brain surgeons, to use your analogy, but they're all in the same specialty of medicine, right?
Yeah, well, I think that's a fair way to approach it. If you've met a brain surgeon named Joe Lukash, you don't go around and every brain surgeon you meet, you call Joe Lukash.
Exactly.
And they're all going to have their own views on things and their own approach. They may deal with similar things, but they are distinct. And I will put this as the caveat. See what happens if you try to deal with an Orisha like you deal with a Loa, or deal with an Nkisi the way you deal with an Orisha. You're going to have a hot mess. Because they're not the same. They won't behave the same. they won't accept the same things. Now, there are some branches of Palo that have kind of conflated some of that. There's even one branch of Palo I'm aware of that will put otanes of orishas in their prendas, which will make any Olorisha squirm. But they will actually do that. I won't talk about the procedures they use because that's not open for public discussion.
Of course.
But I know that it's done. I don't do that. My lineage doesn't do that. Or my lineages don't do that because I actually had several initiations in different lines of Palo. But you can't just treat them the same. They are distinct. There is a really horrendous habit in the 20th and 21st century. I would say some of it started in Cuba, but a lot of it was fed by the neo-pagan and the Wiccan movements, and I'm not trying to offend anyone here. I'm just calling it like it is, that equate everything with everything. Like I said, if I could crucify someone, it would be Joseph Campbell. Now, mind you, I have absolutely nothing personally against the man. I'm sure he's fine as an individual. I've never met him, but I think an awful lot of folklorists as academics would also agree with me that they wince every time they hear of him because everything gets compressed into one story. And that's just not the way it is.
Right.
You know, I'm sorry, but I would slit my wrists if the alternative was tomorrow that the whole world spoke only English.
No, absolutely, absolutely.
And it's the same thing.
But I think
the same. These are not the same. There's no way they are the same. They have similarities. Let's leave it at that.
I think it's very important for people to hear that. About practicing Paleto, because although many babalaos or even santeros, as I say, they may have, as you mentioned, gone through the fast track of Palo, scratch, then go to Cuarto Santo, and then after Cuarto Santo to Ifa, if you're a man. But at the end of the day, there is a belief, especially also because, and also substantiated or backed up, because the Afro-Cuban Ifa corpus has many odus of Ifa.
Okay, me voy en pronto.
Have many references. No problem. Have many references to to Palo, to Kimbisa. In other words, and there may be a situation where, depending on the Odu Ifa within the Afro-Cuban, this, where it may say the person needs to be scratched, needs to work Palo, and there's references within that corpus. And many times, although Baba will respect the autonomy or the independence or the difference of a Palero compared to a Santero or Ifa, but many times, as well, especially if they've been in the different land, they will sort of, put it all under one sort of coat of paint. Right? And so that's why I wanted to emphasize, that aspect. One more question from my end, and then we can take some questions from. We have some questions, and then the interest of time, because I know you're being called for something for your wife's birthday. And please thank her for allowing us to have you with us.
Thank you.
Thank you. We really appreciate it. Tell her we really appreciate it. We wish her good health and many blessings and a long life for her birthday.
Absolutely. Ashe to that.
My last question, because somehow our paths crossed a little bit because of and one of the things the first thing I saw published for you when Teresa introduced me to you and so forth was your reference to and compliment of a book on a matter which is of interest to me, of personal research for the last 10 years.
Mm-hmm.
But I wanted to see how, if at all, that aspect you've seen any evidence or any footprints of that within Kimbisa or within any of the paths that you have been initiated,
Mm-hmm.
which is the concept or the concept of jinn.
Yes,
the
thank
gin.
you for bringing that up. Thank you.
Because especially and I'll just quickly preface it. From part of my research, there is, especially in Zanzibar, and to some extent in Tanzania, you have Sufi.
And Mozambique and Kenya.
Exactly. You have Sufi priest, Muslim priest, coexisting and living side by side, in a sense,
Mm-hmm.
what they call, they use the term, they don't say paleo, they say waganga. They call their priest waganga.
Mm-hmm.
And I happen to have a Tanzanian gentleman whose family is waganga, and
Mm-hmm.
whose also family is partly Muslim. How or what, if any, have you seen in the diaspora? But apart from that, if not in the diaspora or in any of the lineages you're initiated to, what is your interest? Where did you come?
Okay, we come a little bit theoretical here.
Okay.
I'm not going to say that there's a direct link either to Vodou or to Palo or any of that with the jinn. I will note that Majini are African understandings or iterations of what is more widely recognized as Arabic spirit practice. However, I would argue there is at least some reason to suspect that the origin of all of this probably was Africa. I'm not going to step on those toes because I haven't done the work. I have a friend, fellow folklorist whom I met a long time ago because of our mutual interest in religion in New Orleans and the fact that we are both Irish musicians. He is much more connected in things relating to Zanzibar.
Okay.
And there is a tradition there called Ngombo ya Uganga. And Ngombo ya Uganga is the Ngombo that is practiced, Ngoma ya Uganga, that is practiced in Zanzibar in particular, with variations, the Waganga you're referring to.
Uh-huh.
And in all of Southern Africa, in Bantu-speaking Africa, you have what are called Ngomo. Ngoma is a drum.
Uh-huh.
It is what was referred to by certain academics as drums of affliction. And the basic idea is this is a religious model. One goes around looking for cures for whatever is ailing you, from psychosis to inflamed intestines. And eventually you locate a Nganga or doctor who has the spirit that caused it. You pay for your initiations and you perform the drumming for them, and you then become an Nganga for that spirit and carry on the tradition. And this is basically what Palo is. It's basically what a large part of Vodou is. It's basically the origins of modern Brazilian Umbanda. And it's found throughout Africa, from Egypt with the Czar, Mozambique, Kenya, Tanzania, and so forth.
Yeah,
And it's closely related to all of these. These are spirits who come down in crisis. They form links with individuals, and they serve as the possession spirits for possession priests.
The Tsar you mentioned are common, I believe, in Egypt.
Yes.
And they are female, and they
mostly.
Yeah. And they basically they have a, I'm going to use the word loosely, a tutelar jinn that they work with that allows them to govern and be the head of the group to do rituals, including drumming, in order to hopefully help to remove an afflicting or a jinn or
so
causing a problem.
In Eastern Africa, there is the habit of taking gourds, decorating them rather elaborately at times with a lot of beadwork and with carvings, in fact, making tops that have figures on them. That is parallel to the Nkisi or Minkisi of the Congo, but somewhat different in appearance. And when you see these, and some of them are quite elaborate and quite attractive, one is immediately reminded of the Aladdin's lamp in the Arabic story. And these are the houses of the Majini. So, yes. So all of that's related. I don't think you have a real close direct connection in the Afro-Caribbean traditions, because most of the people did not come from that part of Africa. That being said, they are all related, and you go back to Bantu Africa, and that relationship is pretty clearly defined as you move across time and space.
Correct.
And geography.
Correct. So would you say, just last question, and then just one question, then we'll begin wrapping up. Would you say that, or have you heard, and or your experiences, your journeys, would you say that in the terms of Majin, that practice or the way that it's that there's been some mixing of Bantu Nkisi with jinn spiritual knowledge or magic?
Well, I wouldn't call them Nkisi. I wouldn't call them Nkisi because that's very specific to Congo. I think they represent different points along the trajectory of a similar tradition. So
perfect.
I would use the term distant cousins.
Okay, fair enough.
Okay.
So we have a comment from
that being said, I don't think anyone who's involved in Waganga would feel lost in Palo. It would be totally different, but they would also feel that there is a familial sense.
Agreed.
Okay. All right.
Agreed. Yanni Fakemi says,
Yes.
I believe from my studies and experience that there are different entities that govern or inherited certain lineages. They also govern similar systems that deal with the same issue of life. This is why we see similarities, but they are not the same beings.
Right.
Yeah, that's my take on it. Absolutely.
Okay. No, but that's good because I cannot tell you if sorry, I got a fly which is trying to get my you know as well as I how much literature, how many practices, how many houses, right? Deal with that or where that same question or that same quandary comes up, right? So we could have another show, literally. There's so much more we could cover, but
you want to do it at some point? Let me know.
We will absolutely. Owen, what is a phrase, a saying, a motto, a philosophy you live by? Something that from your journeys and all that.
I am going to be freca, and I'm going to say, as my godfather said, you have a lot more to fear from the living than you do from the dead.
Perfect.
Okay. Perfect. I think that's very, very appropriate for our topic of conversation. I am currently scrolling. If you want to, so if people would like to contact Eoghan, you can visit him on his blog site, hedgemason.blogspot.com, or on Facebook as Eoghan Craig Ballard, or MeWe Eoghan Ballard, or sorry, scrolling a little faster, or Eoghan.ballard@gmail.com. So I'll leave that scrolling for a little bit, but
I will note on that, if you're on Facebook, it's Eoghan Craig Ballard, and I put in my middle name for the simple reason that there's an 18-year-old kid who's probably a distant cousin of mine living in Derry in Northern Ireland who gets totally freaked out by this stuff when he gets messages meant for me.
I can imagine.
In the interest of familial peace, make sure you get it right.
Okay, perfect.
So
I love it.
We're already getting calls for an encore event with you, Eoghan.
Absolutely.
I would love for him to come back. Keith Swift says, "Yuppers."
Yep, definitely.
Owen says, "Thank you so much." And yeah, definitely. Owen, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Salam alaikum.
Malaikum salam.
And
I enjoyed myself thoroughly, and I know that there's more to cover.
And long life for your wife. May she have this new year of her journey through this world be with health, happiness, abundance, and much love. Okay?
Thank you.
Okay.
All right. Many blessings. Thank you so much.
All right.
Okay, everybody.
Thanks, Owen. And thank you to everybody who tuned in.
Thank you for tuning in, everybody.
Again, thank you once again to everybody. Enjoy your weekend. Stay safe, everyone, and much health and blessings. Thank you all.